All right, Walton, right back into your lives. Talking Buffalo podcast, part of the Blue Wire Network. I am your host, Patrick Moran. Thank you very much, as always, for locking in. Audio side, we're also on YouTube as well. It's been a while, man. It's been a minute, actually, going back a week or two before the NFL draft back in late April. But I am going to be joined today. In fact, I'm joined right now by my good friend, Aaron Quinn from Cover One.
What's happening,
What's up, buddy, man?
It has been a while. It's been a while since I've chatted. Not DMs. We're chatting all the time, but
yeah. We talk all the time.
Internet,
it's the first,
face-to-face,
right? It's the first time I've had you on the podcast, though, in about a month and a half. So we're in early June right now. Obviously, everything football-wise, for the most part, that can happen has happened. You know, you got the schedule, you got the draft before that, you got free agency. Training camp, of course, is starting in late July. I mean, you get some OTAs and mini camps, but right now, this is kind of like your
dead zone
downtime for you and Greg.
Yes and no. There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that we can't do during the season or during the draft season because that catches right on after the season. So it's a lot of internal house cleaning. So we're not putting as much necessarily time into the podcast where we're only doing the one pod a week and it's more of a positional preview type thing, kind of going through the rosters. That's not as hard of work to do on the podcast side, but a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, a lot of stuff we're excited. So if you are a fan of Cover One, stay tuned. I think we're going to be rolling out some stuff here as the season starts. It's going to be really cool for our fans. But yeah, no, it's a constant grind, man. And there really is the NFL, the way they shape this schedule for the NFL these days. If you're an NFL content creator, it really isn't an off season because when it's dead right now, there's still stuff happening, right? Which we're going to talk about some of that today, but then you really do have to do all the catch up and clean up all the internal stuff and clean up your own house before the next season starts right up here in a month and a half before we're at training camp.
Yeah. Now listen, man, it's not like we've been doing this for our whole lives, but we're also not rookies either.
Right.
Even in the last, 3 to 5 years or so, just the content, it seems to be easier to come up with creative ideas even this time of year. Like, again, after the draft from May and June into July, sometimes it could get a little tough coming up with concepts that you want to do. But in this just constant cycle of the NFL just dominating the news, it kind of just, your shows just kind of write themselves in a way. And then, like I said, in your case, you guys are starting with the positional previews. But yeah, it's almost like you can almost do this with your eyes closed at this point, ain't it?
Yeah, and something always comes up, whether it's, Bills related. There's a good chance here, in the next month or so that one of these potential extensions gets done that people have been talking about, maybe Poyer gets done and then there's more content there. So the NFL is just constantly open for business. And if you were covering the NFL itself, I mean, there is no downtime. Even whether it's the Deshaun Watson news is taking up headlines all the time or just injuries happening at OTAs, like there's always some content. Really, no other sport, in my opinion, maybe I'm a little bit of a homer to football because I follow it and I pod for it, but really no sports have this type of all year hype where people are excited for OTAs. I mean, we're talking about dudes running around in shorts and people just can't get enough.
Right. I agree. And you said, to your point, something's always going on. One of those things, the Bills signed Tavon Austin last week. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes as well. I want to talk about the wide receiver group as a whole. I think that's a crowded room. And I think going into camp, I don't think there's a lot of training camp battles, so to speak, but I do think the back end of the wide receiving unit can turn out to be interesting. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about Peter King writing about Josh Allen. I got a nice quote from his column that he wrote. He dropped it, I believe, on Monday. I also want to spend a few minutes talking about Ryan Fitzpatrick retiring. We'll get to all that in just a couple of minutes. So first, a couple of things. Actually, before we get into any sports talk, I just want to give some quick props to Dave Chappelle. Now, I don't know if people out there who are watching this or listening to this, if they even knew this, but because it kind of was like somebody as big as Dave Chappelle, usually if he's coming to town, about that like weeks, if not months ahead of time. And, tickets are out there and you're trying to win them on radio stations and stuff like that. But this time, Dave Chappelle put together a concert or whatever, a comic appearance at Shea's Buffalo on Sunday. And it was only like a week or so before he went there. And anyway, the tickets sold out. But as it turns out, Dave Chappelle took all of the ticket proceeds from this show and he donated all the proceeds to the victims, the Jeffersons, and the families of them, the Survivors Fund. And I just want to point that out before we get going. I thought that was a
He's the
really
dopest.
classy thing. Yeah, man. Look, man, I'm a big Dave Chappelle fan. I've been a fan of his for a very long time, and I don't know. I think that's really cool what he
He's
did,
always cool
you
like
know.
that. Even his special during the pandemic, and I think the proceeds that he raised from that went to different things that he was funding. I think it was money for George Floyd's family, maybe for that special,
Yeah.
something like that. Dave Chappelle's made a lot of money, and so,
Sure.
but a lot of people have, and you don't always see everyone giving back in that type of manner. But he's the man. Speaking of Dave Chappelle, have you seen the latest Norm Macdonald special that came out on Netflix?
I did.
And Chappelle at the end, man, the way the special was cool. Fans of Norm Macdonald out there, I think will enjoy it. I enjoyed the special itself and Norm's jokes. The after of hearing,
I thought it was even better.
A god of comedy like Dave Chappelle just talk about this dude and putting him on a pedestal was unbelievable for me to listen to, sitting back and listen to some of the best comedic minds of our generation talk about that.
Yeah, it was a really open conversation. It was really cool. Dave Letterman,
Conan, Molly Shannon, Adam Sandler,
is the one
David Spade.
David Spade. Yeah, that was really good. It was a little bit weird seeing him do a comedy bit, so to speak. I'm assuming it was taped during the pandemic, right? Where there was no audience or anything. So he pretty much just did like a podcast like you and I would be doing right now, and no microphone by himself. But
he was working on material for a Netflix special.
Right.
Nobody knew he was sick that whole time. And they talked about that. Like all of his close friends in the comedy world had no idea that Norm was sick. And he had a doctor's appointment the next day. And so I think what he did was try to get this new material on tape, knowing that the doctor's appointment, everything wasn't going well. So knowing that it could end at any point with the pandemic, that he might not ever be able to actually tape the special, which was true. He wasn't able to do it. So foresight by him, a lot of morbid, him talking about coming to terms with his own mortality and stuff like that, which in hindsight looks is kind of a sad thing. But again, listening to Chappelle, if you haven't watched and you are a fan of Dave, even if you aren't a big fan of Norm, to listen to the way they talk about him was unbelievable to me.
Yeah, it was really cool. I enjoyed actually the conversation afterwards with everybody, that panel, more than the special itself, which was pretty cool. But yeah, man, props to Dave Chappelle. I thought that was really cool. Lost in like a tiny sliver, I should say, of any type of silver lining over this awfulness that happened here a couple of weeks ago. It has been really nice to see people coming together, the Bills, the Sabres, the alumni, the current players, and stuff like that. And I still get a little bit shook when I see Bruce Smith, the videos of him and just breaking down and losing a little. You could just tell how genuine and heartbroken he felt over that. But anyway, it's been, again, it's just an awful situation, of course, but it's been pretty cool to see some of that stuff. And Dave Chappelle definitely deserves some credit for doing that. I want to circle back before we get into any current Bills talk. We did a 5-week mock draft series, and I'd be remiss because I haven't had you on since the draft, because you did go to Vegas along with Greg and Eric to cover the draft for Cover One. I kind of want to go back quickly, and this won't take long because, again, I know this is old news, but I thought it would be fun to just look at how we did in our final mock in terms of where these guys ended up going in the draft. I'm not going to talk about their performance. This would be something, God willing, if we're both still in this position a couple of years from now, it'd be fun to rewind this tape and go through this mock 3 years from now, because then we could tell if these would have been good picks or not. We're just talking about the accuracy of how we drafted. So let me pull this up. If you're watching on YouTube, it's on the screen. If not, I'm going to read these off to you. This was Aaron and I's our final mock draft, version 5, and this was about a week or so before the final draft. In the first round, no, we didn't hit on one. But all right, so in the first round, we had Kenyon Green, offensive guard from Texas A&M. In the second round, we took Cam Taylor-Britt, a corner going to Nebraska. I want to talk about that in a minute because we took him in the third round of our first 4 mocks, and then we moved him up to be safe. In the third round, we took our running back, Isaiah Spiller from Texas A&M. Fourth round, Alec Pierce, wide receiver from Cincinnati. The fifth round, Chris Paul, a guard from Tulsa, interior offensive lineman, I should say, from Tulsa. Isaac Taylor-Stewart, a corner from USC. We took him the 6th. And then we had 2 7th-rounders, Thomas Booker from Stanford, or a defensive interior defensive lineman, and then Smoke Monday, safety from Auburn. We took with our second of 7 round picks. All right, so when we look back now at the draft, and I think we were pretty reasonably accurate with most of these in terms of where they ended up
Yeah.
going.
Chris
So
Paul went later, right?
Chris Paul did go later. So Kenyon Green, we took with the first pick, 25th overall. He ended up going to Houston in the first round. I think pick 15. So he went 10 picks earlier.
Yep.
Cam Taylor Britt, in
To the
reality,
Bengals.
also went in the second round. He went pick
Yeah.
60 to the Bengals. So he went just 5 picks, I think, after the Bills were supposed to be on the clock. The Bills,
Yep.
they traded down a couple times and ended up with James Cook.
Yep.
In the third round, Isaiah Spiller, we took him in the third. He ended up lasting into the fourth round. He went to the Chargers in the fourth round, pretty close there. In the fourth round, man, I kind of wish this would have worked out for the Bills as it turned out. We took Alec Pierce in the fourth round. What a steal that would have been. He ended up going to the Colts in the second round of the draft. Actually, a couple spots where the Bills picked or were on the clock in the second round. Chris Paul, we got him in the fifth. He ended up going in the seventh round to Washington.
Yeah. You should have seen me in the draft media room of every round that the Bills didn't take an interior lineman. He was still on the board. Like, come on. Like, I had him in the fifth. Let's take him. But apparently the NFL teams were in disagreement with the boards.
Right. Isaac Taylor Stewart, we took him in the sixth round of corner. He ended up going undrafted.
Yep.
He signed with Dallas. You know, I got to look up Thomas Booker because off the top of my head, I forgot to write him down. He's the one guy. I'm not sure where he went. I think he did get drafted, though. I know he got drafted. I'll come back to him in a second. And then we took Smoke Monday, a safety. Well, I did not know his real name is Quindarius. Nickname Smoke Monday. Anyway, he did not get drafted, and he signed shortly thereafter with the New Orleans Saints. I think all in all, go ahead.
Thomas Booker was drafted 5th round to the Houston Texans.
All right, so he went in the 5th
pick.
All right, so I would say, Pierce in the 4th, Booker in the 7th. We took guys who ended up going earlier than what we did, so I would call those good value picks for us. Cam Taylor Britt was pretty damn close. Kenyon, and again, we kept taking him in the 3rd round in our previous mocks, and then Kenyon Green actually ended up being the first guard taken in the draft.
Yeah.
Ahead of Zion Johnson, I thought that was kind of surprising. But
to me, a little bit, yeah. But that was the argument, I think, when those guys were falling there. It was like, man, how do you, with the talent I remember that you had available at the number 1 pick, it's like, hey, how do you not take this guy if he falls to you at that position? I think that we were probably right on that, and that he went 15th. So
yeah, no, we didn't get the players right, but I think with one exception here, I think we did a good job when it came to the positions that they were looking at. Like we took a corner in the 2nd. Of course, the Bills took one in the 1st. We took a running back in the 3rd, and they took one in the 2nd. And then we took a wide receiver in the 4th, and the Bills ended up taking one in the 5th. So we weren't really off in terms of positional value and what they were looking for at all, with the exception, and I was very surprised, the Bills didn't take any interior offensive linemen, and we took 2 of them in the first 5 rounds, and the Bills literally didn't take any. I guess, and again, this is old news. It's kind of the rehash, the trash from the end of April. But as you look at this mock now and you see what the Bills ended up doing in this draft, I don't know, man. I thought our mock was pretty good. If this would have been, and it's easy to say now, we'll be seeing a couple of years, but had this been the Bills' actual draft, our mock draft, I would have been happy with it.
I think so. Yeah, we won't know for a couple of years, but I mean, just the fact that we had Pierce in the 4th and the NFL had him at least the Colts had him, which I respect the Colts. I think they're a good team. I think they draft well. They had him as a 2nd. I think that would have been a steal. So yeah, I mean, adding this group of players that we drafted, I would have been very happy. But again, I'm happy with the Bills draft too. I think they did just as good of a job, if not better than we did in our mock. So either way, happy. And that's sort of the process. Isn't so much accuracy. I think the thing for me every year doing those mocks with you or just doing the mocks in general is it's a good thought exercise that helps me to learn about how many prospects there are, and knowing that it's a flawed process going into it. I think that's my biggest beef with people in mocks is they go into it, and then when I post one, they've been doing so many mocks and they're like, oh, there's no way so-and-so goes here. Oh, there's no way so-and-so goes there. And it's like, yeah, a lot of the stuff's not going to be right, but you don't know that. And we don't know that. And nobody knows until we get there. So at least have fun with it. Make it a thought exercise where you're learning throughout the whole process.
That's the whole key too. I mean, there's probably a couple dozen players that I learned a lot about just from our conversations over the course of 5 different weeks. And I will say with the actual draft, I was really excited because I was a big James Cook fan. And, I'm going to pat myself on the back here a little bit. After night 1, that was the guy I talked about on Twitter immediately after and the next morning. That's the guy that I wanted. So it would be kind of hypocritical for me to complain about a draft when I got the guy that quite literally
True.
I wanted. Anyway, all right. So that was fun to look back. And like I said, this 2 years running now. Hopefully we'll both be God willing, we'll be around to be able to do this a third year next year. So there was a little bit of Bills news. Tavon Austin signed with them. A name. So I get the buzz because he is a name. I want to do 2 things. I want to talk about him a little bit as a player. I want to get your thoughts on him as a player, and then maybe how he may or may not ultimately fit into this roster. The rundown on Tavon Austin is he's a 32-year-old veteran, the former 8th overall pick back in 2013. In fact, the Bills were on the clock and they traded down back in 2013. That's when they ended up with EJ Manuel. But anyway, 9-year veteran. The Bills are his 5th team, and they're his 4th team now in the last 4 years. Statistically, his best, he had 24 catches last year. He played with the Jacksonville Jaguars. 24 catches, 213 yards, 1 touchdown, 8.9 yards per catch with Jacksonville. Last year, his best season statistically was back in 2016. He had 58 catches for 509 yards and 3 touchdowns with the Rams. I know a lot of people are talking about him as a potential kick or punt returner. I will say it's worth noting statistically, at least anyway, he has not returned punts since playing with Dallas back in 2019, and he hasn't returned kicks since 2017 with the Rams. So before we talk about this group, which is a crowded wide receiver room, what are your thoughts right now on Tavon Austin? Well, there's good, bad, or ugly.
Yeah, so he's been a weird player for me all along. So back in, 2012 draft?
2013.
2013 draft that he was drafted. I remember he was in that range for the Bills, and there was a lot of arguments over Bills fans going nuts and wanting to add that type of weapon to this team back then. And I got nervous about the highlights were super fun, and he has great high school highlights, and he had great college highlights, and he's a highlight machine. And I didn't know, those are always fun to watch, but they don't always translate. And I'll tell you, I've never maybe seen somebody who's probably carried more by their amateur career to this long into their pro career. Because really, when you look at Tavon Austin as a pro, he hasn't produced a whole lot as a NFL pro. So I don't know how that hype from the name itself hasn't worn off here over, what has it been, 8 years or so career, 9-year career in the NFL. Like, how does that not worn off where you realize that, okay, this guy is just at best average 4th wide receiver on an NFL team, 3rd wide receiver on an NFL team. And that's at best, right? And then the other thing is he's probably below average. And when you look at those highlights that he had, it was all speed and agility. And those are the things that wear off over time. The guy's 32 years old. Like, he's definitely doesn't have that burst that he had in 2013 through 2016, like the season you said. And so This is weird to me. When I saw the name pop up for the Bills, I knew what type of reaction I was going to get because people like, you know what else I think plays into a lot of this is Madden NFL football. I think probably a lot of people had him on Madden teams as like a fast guy that they were able to make something work with. And so they know the name, they recognize the name, but this is, in my opinion, this is absolutely where the name itself carries way more value than the player itself does. I think this is a steep uphill climb to make a Buffalo Bills roster. I'm fine with having him as a camp body. I'm fine with having him be a guy that maybe pushes in the kick return thing. But like you said, it hasn't been a common thing where he's right out the end of his career as a solid kick returner either. He's not coming off, somebody had said in my mentions, maybe it was maybe this is the new Andre Roberts. It's like, well, Andre Roberts came off a Pro Bowl returning season. He was one of the best returners in all of football when he came here. So it's not that. To me, it's more, they need bodies at this position through camp. Maybe it pushes that Isaiah McKenzie spot. Maybe it pushes Stevenson. And if it does, in my opinion, they're not happy with the wide receiver ability of those players, and they're going to push them on that aspect of it because I just don't see it as a return thing. I think Shakir could probably deal with some of the return duties. I do think they're going to try to get it for Isaiah McKenzie available again to do that and maybe gain some faith in him. I don't see a scenario where Tavon Austin makes this 53-man roster, not as a 32-year-old that hasn't really produced.
I'll say this. I understand to an extent why fans would be excited. You mentioned a lot of the points. He is a big name. He is known for speed. And I get it too. There's a hole in the return game for the Bills. Clearly, Sean McDermott last year, at least anyway, did not trust Isaiah McKenzie, did not trust Marquez Stevenson, had Micah Hyde back there returning punts just because he was a guy he could trust to actually catch the football. And if he got a couple yards, that was a bonus. I get the desire and why fans could get excited about Tavon Austin. But again, when you look at when you look at the numbers, it hasn't been there. And
he's got 4 touchdowns over the last 5 NFL seasons.
Right. And this is going to be the 4th team in 4 years that he's playing for, that he's trying to make this roster. 4 teams in 4 years. And also, and again, not to rain on anybody's parade. I don't think you're being necessarily negative on the guy. We're just being realistic.
Oh, yeah.
I would say this too. He didn't get signed until the very end of May, the beginning of June. He's been sitting around in free agency for what, 2 months? No, more than 2 months. There's a reason for that, probably. You know what I'm saying? It's
you see this happen all the time with older guys. I compared this more not to Andre Roberts coming. I compared it more to maybe like even Brandon Powell last year, where they like kind of had him in and doing a little bit of returns. Maybe he has a chance, a long shot to make the roster, but he's gone in August at some point. I think that's what we see out of Austin here.
Yeah, I agree as well. I'll tell you what, let's take a real quick break. I'm going to come back on the other side. I want to talk about some of the other wide receivers and what I think is a crowded room. And again, we'll have to wait for camp to really start to get a good idea, but maybe a preliminary look at how we think this might play out. Be right back. All right, I'm back with Aaron Quinn, and we are talking Buffalo Bills wide receivers right now. All right, no conversation needed with Stephon Diggs or Gabe Davis, or I don't think Jamison Crowder either. I mean, those guys are locks. Shakir is almost a lock. I mean, he would have to be like historically awful at training camp, I think, to not make the team. But you know what? Before that, though, let's talk about this for just 1 second. I have not had an opportunity to talk to you on the podcast. I talk to you all the time, but on the podcast, we haven't talked since before the draft. I get why people are really high on Khalil Shakir. I get it. Okay. He's a steal in the 5th round. He represents great value. And I am not trying to temper anyone's excitement for the kid whatsoever.
Careful here. What are you saying?
I'm pretty excited about him. Here's what I'm saying. If he's that polished, if he's that good of a football player, how's he last into the 5th round? And I'm not saying he can't be. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of mid to late round picks that turn out to be great. Exactly. He could be the next step on these. I'm not saying he's not, but it's like, I don't know. There's a lot of good football teams. I get it. The 1st or 2nd round, he was never that kind of prospect, but there were lots of teams picking in the 3rd and 4th round that didn't, that pass on the kid. And again, I'm not saying he could end up being a stud in the NFL. Absolutely. Right. But
some of it,
it's like temper your expectations a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. So this one's a hard one for me, right? Because for so many years, we would see picks come into the Bills during that drought run, and you needed all of them to make some impact for your team to really get over that hump, right? Like you were starting to really reach deep and say like, oh, well, if we can get this 5th round wide receiver to really come in and produce. The problem with that idea was that you didn't have the quarterback and you didn't have the structure. You weren't a good team. And so you were praying that these picks would come in and change the culture, where now the Bills have the team. They're a consensus top team in the NFL by almost every estimation. They're favorites for the Super Bowl. You have one of the best 3 to 5 QBs, depending on who you talk to, in the world. And so I think it's a little bit more fair to say you see some talent at the college level. If it's going to translate immediately anywhere in the league, it's going to be teams like Buffalo, like Green Bay. And that's how New England was when Tom Brady was there. You would get these rookies and young wide receivers that nobody knew their names would come in and play well because the system worked, because the team worked. and it provides you have a solid wide receiver room where he's not challenging Stephon Diggs' role. He doesn't need to come in. Shakir really has no pressure to come in and produce in 2022, right? He could have a red shirt technically year like Gabe Davis did almost that first year, and that would be okay. And so it's really all playing with house money. And so I think that also allows for when he does get the opportunity to make an impact, there's no pressure on a rookie to come in and lift the organization out of a drought or anything like that. This is just all extra. You're coming into a great situation, a great wide receiver room with one of the best QBs in the entire planet. I get why fans get excited and say, oh, this could instantly hit. I agree with you in that, yes, those things all line up. And I do believe he's the kind of player that can come into the NFL right away and be a productive player. I'm not saying he's going to come in and blow the doors off this and be one of the best rookies we've seen, but he could come in right away and be a productive player. One, we don't want that to happen. The top 3 wide receivers, we want to stay healthy. We want those guys to make a Super Bowl run. We want this kid to learn the game alongside them and get his reps when he wants to. But I do see it from fans in that, hey, if it's going to happen, it could happen here. But I agree that, maybe we need to pump the brakes a little bit in that this guy might just have a hard time seeing the field in order to even be an immediate productive player. It might have to come in special teams in that return game that we were talking about a bit ago.
Yeah, especially as a rookie, when you have Crowder out there.
Yeah.
As long as he stays healthy, he's going to be that third receiver. He's going to be that slot guy. McKenzie's going to have
there could be a
scenario
where Shakir's good enough to push Crowder towards the end of the year. We've seen McDermott being in this organization not always necessarily ready to throw rookies out there right away and get them in the file, but they are willing to give them those reps as the season progresses if they see it. And so I could see a scenario where they know that Crowder's not a long-term answer for this team, where those reps could end up to Shakir over time. But yeah, to start the season, I don't think he's going to be able to crack in there a lot in terms of getting those touches. Because if McKenzie does make this roster, and we'll talk about him probably, I'm sure too, you're manufacturing touches for him because that's all he does. If he's not a kick returner or a punt returner, all he is, hey, let's manufacture this guy X amount of touches a game. And then that keeps Shakir off the field if you're giving McKenzie those touches.
I agree 100%. And one good thing about a kid like Shakir is when he does see the field, he's not going to get that much attention because there's going to be a lot of attention on Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis and Dawson Knox.
And OJ Howard. OJ Howard is also going to dip in.
Right. James Cook coming out of the backfield.
Yeah.
So Shakir is going to be in some very winnable matchups. And that's kind of how I feel about Jamison Crowder, who's going to
There's only one ball to go around. That's the other problem with this Bills team
and
the type of production. I think everybody thinks, Gabe Davis is going to produce big. All these guys are going to produce big. I think some will probably get 2 guys that produce at like really good levels, but then everyone else is going to be fighting over that one ball that goes around. And, Diggs is going to get his targets. I'm hoping that they increase Dawson Knox targets. I think that he's earned that to be one of those top 3 targets on this team. And so that starts to, I know our friend Bruce Nolan likes to talk about his polarity pies and all of his pie charts and stuff. There's not a lot of pie left for these guys, for, your Khalil Shakirs to get production out of the one ball that goes around.
Yeah, I agree. And so I'll tell you, let's say this again, unless he has like a historically bad camp or he gets injured, he's going to be on the 53-man roster when the season starts. So let's go ahead and put him in 10. All right. So we'll have 4 receivers that are definitely going to be locks.
Yeah.
Now you're left with Isaiah McKenzie, Marquez Stevenson, Jake Kumaro, and Tavon Austin. And I guess we could throw Isaiah Hodgins in there as well. Guys who I think, and this is what kind of interests me, is they bring various different things to the table. Jake Kumaro is become a really good special teams player. Marquez Stevenson.
To me, he's probably the most lock out of that tier that you just talked about because of that special teams ability.
I want to get to that with you because, and I will say this about Isaiah McKenzie. This is just my opinion. I think that he's going to go into training camp this summer. I think, don't know it, but I think he's going to be given the opportunity to be this team's kick and punt returner again. I think Sean McDermott might go into camp with a clean slate with him. I think he's going to need to be in some fashion a kick returner to have any real consistent, useful purpose with this team. Now we did talk about Isaiah McKenzie before Tavon signed and before they drafted Shakir. we don't think he's a mortal lock to make this roster based on the contract
Yeah,
that
no.
they gave him. I know you felt that way at the time, and I know you feel that way right now as well.
Yeah, I'm not on the Isaiah McKenzie hype train at all, and I'm not a hater. I think for who he is and what he is, I think there's a role for him on an NFL team. I think it's super limited. I don't want to see him as a kicker punt returner. I'm past that personally. I think it's that Maya Angelou quote I use all the time with Isaiah McKenzie is like when somebody tells you who they are, believe them. And he is for 6 years now, I think in the NFL, he's had one struggle, which is ball security as a punt and kick returner, and it just is who he is. And there's bad decision making and there's some real special plays mixed in there too. But the thing you want the most on special teams is consistency, right? And so you thought you were going to maybe get trust and consistency, and we thought maybe we would get that with Stevenson, and that was up and down too. Willing to give him a little bit more of a chance because we're talking about a 6-year veteran, 7-year veteran versus a 2-year player. But I think that battle also does include Shakir, and since he's a lock, that's in my opinion is the best case scenario is he becomes your returner for this year. And maybe you're able to move away from Stevenson, and maybe you do keep McKenzie on the 53, but maybe he's more of a matchup at game day active player because he's super limited, and he's not going to be a guy if he's not a punt or kick returner. He's not running down the field and tackling guys on special teams, right? So you're talking about keeping a guy on your roster and on that active roster that what's he going to get? If this lineup is healthy that we're talking about, you're going to have to find him those manufactured jet sweep touches, or the snaps will be him being sort of a decoy in that motion role where he's not actually getting the ball. So maybe he's getting 10 snaps a game. Maybe that's a tough pill to swallow when your roster's so good and so deep at a lot of positions. And you're going to want to carry more depth at certain positions to keep a guy that's super limited when you have young guys behind him, or a guy like a Jake Krumro who can get on special teams and be a core special teams contributor and get a lot more snaps in and meaningful snaps in. It's just hard to then hang on to a guy like McKenzie, but the fans love him. The team seems to love him. They put him in all the media stuff that they can. I think that there is an additional thing that gives him value off the field that Sean McDermott likes is the guys like being around Isaiah McKenzie. He's a fun dude in the locker room. Everybody kind of roasts him a little bit. He's that guy that everyone keeps around, and they all give him shit for being small and all that stuff. I think to Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane on the camaraderie side, the locker room side, there's a lot of weight
that's not nothing
in there. Yeah, it's not to them.
Nothing.
It's not.
That's not nothing. I agree 100%. Completely unrelated to the receivers. I just got to throw this in there. I like Isaiah McKenzie. I wish he wouldn't change his uniform number. I hate looking at him in number 6. I am that guy.
I'm so sick of that modern
Nobody
NFL.
gives a shit. I know.
I'm with you. I'm sick of. I don't want.
Keep 19, man. I hated that.
Yeah, linebackers need to be in the 50s and 40s.
Yeah, come on, man. Enough of
Honestly,
that shit.
I don't even like wide receivers in the teens.
No,
I don't. I like 80s. Give me the 80s all the time. I think it looks best.
Me too. I at least live with the teens, but I hate the single digits.
I think this podcast just turned into what are the 2 old dudes from the Muppets that sit up there.
I was just thinking as I'm talking about this, like I may as well call up Buffalo Wins Joe and get him on this podcast.
Just a bunch of old guys bitching about the glory days.
Let's play this game. So we already got 4 receivers that are a lock, and let's assume there's going to be no injuries because injuries obviously change the game, of course.
Yeah.
Let's take McKenzie, Stevenson, Kumaro, Austin, and Hodgins. So that's 1, 2, 3. That's what is that? 5 guys there? 5 guys.
Why are you leaving out Tanner Gentry, bro? That's Josh Allen's guy, bro.
Come on, man. I want you to pick the 2 that you think are the most likely if they were to keep 6. So we got 4. So we got Diggs, Gabe Davis, Crowder, and Shakir. Them 4 you can put in
Stevenson, Hodgins, Kumaro, and Austin.
Yeah, I want you to take 2. Let's just say they're going to keep 6 on the roster to start the season. So if you can only keep 2, who are the 2 that you think, again, barring injury, that you think right now, and a lot could change between now and, of course, late August or whatever. But as you're feeling it right now, give me the 2 that you think are most likely to make the roster, and then we'll go up to 3 in case if they keep 7 receivers, which I'm not sure that they're going to.
I think it would have to be McKenzie and Kumaro. In my opinion.
Yeah.
I could see it being this summer being a battle between Stevenson and McKenzie, but Stevenson I think has a bit of an uphill climb because he did struggle as a rookie, and they could cut bait on that, and it wouldn't be the end of the world. They could cut bait on Stevenson, and that's not going to hurt them long term. Where I think they would rather, if all things were equal, they would keep McKenzie just for what we talked about, the off the field stuff in the locker
Right.
room and being a vet and being a guy that they do trust. He has shown that he can produce in the NFL, right? Like that New England game, while I knock that he took advantage and the Bills took advantage of a matchup and Bill Belichick refusing to do anything to adapt in that game, and they just continued to take advantage of it. I don't think that's who Isaiah McKenzie is, but there is some proof at the NFL level that there's production. There's film on him that's shown him to be able to do something and come in a pinch as your fourth, fifth wide receiver and help your team out and make plays at the NFL level. And even if he is that fourth, fifth wide receiver in certain game matchups, if you go up against a team that plays heavy man, you're going up against Bill Belichick again, and he wants to put Miles Bryant on your slot receiver. Well, shit, let's throw Isaiah McKenzie out there and see if we can get another big game, right? Like he gives you that tool that does allow you to be more multiple, does allow you to do some of the things with the jet sweep thing. But he's just so limited as a player that it's also tough. But so I think he has the edge over Stevenson. I think
is Stevenson's path to this roster purely if he comes in the summer and
he's got to win that return
as a returner? Like he's the guy.
He's got to win it hands down.
Yeah, he's got to win it hands down to be the kick and the punt returner. Basically, you're Andre Roberts. Is that Marquez Stevenson's one realistic path to this roster?
I think so. It's got to be if he, and then maybe over time he can develop into that Isaiah McKenzie role additionally. And that you can manufacture him some touches on the offense. I'd be fine with that. But yeah, I think he needs to come out this summer and be so much better than Shakir as an option at that and decision-making stuff like that, that you have to additionally keep this extra guy that is also limited on your roster because he's your kick and return guy. There's no other way that you can keep a guy like this. I think they're going to have to lose some veteran special teams guys this year. They're going to, come August, that are just going to be casualties of a deep roster, and you're not going to be able to keep all of them. They already have lost some. We know Andre Smith has that suspension that could hurt him for the year. So there's always turning over in that veteran special teams stuff. And so, I think they're going to prioritize that. So if you're not contributing in that manner, if you're not a return specialist and you're not going to, I don't see Stevenson doing what Jake Kumro does on special teams, that it's going to be a tough path to the roster otherwise.
I think for Stevenson to make the roster, again, barring no injuries, I think the Bills ultimately would have to keep the seventh receiver then and determine that he's basically going to be your Andre Roberts, and he would have a lot to prove over the course of training camp in the preseason for that to happen.
Yeah, he's also a player that I'm not sure there's enough on him where if they cut him that wouldn't be an easy stashing on the practice squad. Like maybe NFL feels better about him. Maybe this somebody would fall in love with that speed and try to put a claim in, but most guys that get cut don't get claimed. So I could see that is probably the most likely scenario where they continue to groom him.
All right. So when it comes to Isaiah McKenzie, we both agree that for reasons matchup, even if it's just a couple times per year, he might be a good matchup. He'll make the roster for that reason. Plus what he brings off the field in the locker room, as you talked about. And Kumaro, for obvious reasons, he's a great special teams player. He's turning into a really good special teams player, by the way. So I think one thing that we agree with then is even if the Bills do keep 7, it's very unlikely, again, I keep saying it, barring injury, I think we both think that Tavon Austin is going to be a former Buffalo Bill before week 1 of this regular season.
Well, you know what the big thing is, and Greg made a point of this the other day on one of our shows, is you look at this lineup and it is pretty stacked, and you like a lot of the players for this Bills wide receiver room. One of the things that scares me, and we talk about the potential of injuries, is, Tavon Austin doesn't address if Gabriel Davis goes down, what are you doing at your second outside wide receiver, right? Like Jameson Crowder is not kicking out to the outside. Shakir maybe can. I think that he's shown some of that in college where he can play, slot, he can play on the outside, he can do it all. But will he be at that spot? Is he ready yet to come in and take those reps for Gabe Davis? Hodgkins maybe could be, but he was supposed to be more of a big slot kind of player. I
Yeah.
don't see a guy on this roster, and Tavon Austin bringing him in. I thought they might bring a wide receiver in, but I didn't know that it would be one that also doesn't fill that role. And so if there's a chink in the armor of the construction of this, again, this is me assuming that I'm not sure if Shakir's ready to just come in right away and take that type of production. That is kind of the chink in the armor here, is if Diggs or Davis goes down for any amount of time, is then you become kind of a really limited, small, full slot receiver. Like, you have to get real creative. And then maybe that goes back to Dorsey. And I think in this sort of conversation, we need to include Dawson Knox and OJ Howard, because I think they're going to be very much involved in this pass catching game. And so
Sure.
it just changes some of that, though, on the outside, that you don't have that guy and that type of flexibility. The only type of flexibility I see is that if a Crowder goes down, then you could work in Shakir, you could work in McKenzie. Stevenson might be able to do some of that stuff in the slot. If you kept it Tavon Austin, that's really where he would shine. And so you have a lot of that backup, but we're not seeing anything. It's a lot of chips seem to be all in on Davis being a true number 2 wide receiver and doing that for an entire year.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to his health. I think if he stays healthy, I think he's a legitimate bona fide number 2 for sure at this point. All right, so it'll be something to keep a big interest in going into camp. Is, do the Bills keep 6 or 7 at wide receiver? I think that's going to be a good storyline. We both think Tavon Austin has a tough path to making the roster, and we both think Marquez Stevenson is going to have one hell of a training camp in preseason, very likely returning kicks to see himself make this roster. I want to turn our attention quickly before we get out of here. Josh Allen. All right, so
He's great.
Peter King wrote a column on Monday, and he talked about, he had a list of the most influential NFL people this season, and he had Josh Allen right high, number 7. If you're watching this on YouTube, I got it up. If not, I'm going to read this to you quickly. Peter King writes about Josh Allen, and he's number 7 on his list of the most influential NFL people, which, by the way, top 6 was Roger Goodell, Deshaun Watson, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, Rob Walton, who's a prospective next Denver Broncos owner, and Marie Donahue, who is the Amazon VP / Global Sports Video. Anyway, Peter King said this about Josh Allen. Allen's here because he's the quarterback on the best team in the league entering the season. The best test of a quarterback's influence on a franchise is the TV schedule. And Allen's rookie year, 2018, the Mormon Bills played 15 games at 1 o'clock Sunday. Man, I missed that. And 1 Monday night game in Allen's 5th year. 2022, the Bills have been booked for the season opener at the Super Bowl champion Rams. 2 Monday night games, 1 Amazon Thursday game, 1 Thanksgiving game, a CBS doubleheader gem at Kansas City, and one of the best games of this year's schedule, Green Bay at Buffalo Sunday night, week 8. Allen's out front row with the Bills. The Buffalo supermarket shooting in May is an example of how he's morphing from a lesser-known college player in Wyoming to a guy who's ready for the bright lights of NFL stardom. Scoring 83 points in 8 postseason quarters helps. The way the Bills ended the season was reminiscent of the Jim Kelly K-Gun offense, putting up 95 points in the division and conference title games in the 1990 playoffs. Now Allen will try to finish the job Kelly's Bills never could, and we'll be watching. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I think actually, it's going to sound such a homer take. I think you probably maybe could have put him higher. I think he's top 5 in influential. I think Josh Allen, I say this all the time, and I don't know if I'm even fully articulating the point that I want to make with it, is I got little kids. We talked about it earlier. My kid's 6 now, and he was running around the neighborhood with other friends, and they're all talking about Josh Allen and the Bills and stuff, and they love Josh Allen. And I try to think of, man, what it would be like to be a 6-year-old kid looking up at Josh Allen, who is just this massive, he's larger than life dude playing with the biggest guys, most athletic guys in the world. And this guy's just a huge superhero like figure, a Greek god, playing with these guys, and the things he does, slinging the ball down the field, jumping over dudes, stiff arming defensive linemen. Like, it's almost scripted. Like, this is some comic book superhero that plays football for these kids. And then you take all that on-field stuff, and then you take the off the field package and the, Shi's Children's Hospital and his embracing of this community. And, he just did the golf thing with Aaron Rodgers.
That's a big deal.
Tom Brady for your quarterback. I said this, my brother's a Bears fan, and they haven't really had a true franchise QB. And that's a great franchise. That's one of the biggest markets in football. And they've had some success. And we talk about how weird it is still for me as a fan that my quarterback of my team, my favorite quarterback of my team, got asked to be with fucking Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes. We're talking Super Bowls and MVPs and endorsement deals. And it's like the Buffalo Bills quarterback was invited to be in this because he's such a draw. And because people just want to see him and be a part of what he's got and the charisma. He does it all right.
Not Joey Burrow, not Matt Stafford. There's a lot of other
I think some of those guys are right in that next tier, but Josh Allen has officially been invited to the table of
he's
the NFL.
He's a legit star now, to your point. He has literally become bigger than life. And I'm old enough that I can remember, I'm an older adult now, watching Josh Allen be larger than life. And I was young enough then to remember Jim Kelly being larger than life. And I still to this day remember when Jim Kelly or Bruce Smith, Thurman, when those guys would show up at a bar or a restaurant or whatever store you were at, it was a big, big, big deal.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that with Josh now. He has that
big time
superstardom, almost comic book superhero, like you said. And it's not hype. It's legit. I will
take earned.
You're talking about you're talking about being a homer. I'll be a homer too, then I guess, because I will take this to my grave until I see otherwise. His 2-game stretch against the Patriots and the Chiefs is the best I've ever seen a quarterback play. Best
quarterbacking we've ever seen in our life.
I've never seen any quarterback in any time ever play better than Josh Allen did against the Patriots and the Chiefs. So he's backing it up on the field. They're the Super Bowl favorites. He's the betting favorite to win MVP.